What up, everybody? One of the biggest moments that took place in the fourth series finale was the cartels merging down in Mexico. The merger between the Estrada and Marquez cartels. When Tommy heard about this merger, he was ready to walk away from it all, thinking that the merger meant that he was going to have to work with his enemy, Roberto Ortega, only to find out as him and Miguel were about to walk out that the merger included one more condition, and that was eliminating the person who had been causing problems ever since he got to Chicago, and that was Roberto Ortega. As Ortega went to war with CBI and the coalition when he got into town, making the whole city hot. While Tommy, on the other hand, left the city in a better condition than he found it in after uniting the gangs in the coalition and ending a lot of gang wars in the streets of Chicago, and also leaving with Miguel and Shanti as distros, and both of them getting along and on the same page, which was a big difference from when Tommy got to Chicago, when Miguel and the Serbs were the biggest distros in the city and they were at war with each other. Then, after letting Tommy know the other condition of the merger, Che handed Tommy the strap and let him know that Roberto Ortega was his kill. But something else to keep in mind in regards to this is that Che specifically said that the decision to merge the cartels was made by their bosses down in Mexico. So that lets us know that neither Che or Roberto Ortega were actually the main bosses and the leaders of their cartels. But like I had talked about before, they were the cartel reps. So this means they were basically like managers or shot callers over a specific territory or region, but not the main bosses. That's why when Roberto Ortega was in solitary confinement, he told Miguel that he might be in solitary, but he's still running things. So yes, Ortega was running things as a shot caller or a manager in his territory, but he wasn't the big boss of the cartel in Mexico. So that means the main bosses, like a Lobos or Jimenez siblings down in Mexico, those characters haven't been introduced yet on screen. But speaking of Lobos and the Jimenez, ever since the beginning of OG Power, there has normally been two dominant cartels in Mexico, with the series starting off with Lobos and the Jimenez as the leaders of these cartels. And one thing about Lobos is that I never remember hearing the name of his cartel, because it definitely wasn't the Lobos cartel. But when Lobos was taken off the board, it was said that the Jimenez had taken complete control over the Mexican border, as they became the main cartel in the game. But after Alicia and Diego were taken off the board, we ain't hear nothing else about cartels in the final season of OG Power or in Book 2 Ghost at all. And when we did start hearing about the cartels again in Season 2 of Force, again like in OG Power, there was two dominant cartels, the Estrada and the Marquez cartel. And I feel like these cartels are likely connected to Lobos and the Jimenez in some type of way also, because when Che cut off the Serbs, he specifically said that the Estrada cartel had been supplying the Serbs for 20 years, dating back to the early 2000s, including the OG Power timeline. So because of that, we know in OG Power, when Tommy was supplied by the Serbs, they were getting their product from the Estrada cartel. And we know that the Serbs weren't being supplied by the Jimenez because they were beefing in OG Power over those LA ports. So that means that the Estrada would have been connected to Lobos if they were connected to one of the two. And also keep in mind how the name Felipe was mentioned multiple times in season 2, even by Che himself. And the Marquez could have been connected to the Jimenez, and that's why they each had similar calling cards. The Jimenez with the card with the spider web, and Ortega had the Mexican passion flower that he used, and even had a picture of a spider on his wall in jail. But regardless of the history of these cartels and what it is and who's actually running the show in Mexico, now these cartels have merged. This means that they are now one big cartel that is twice as powerful and would easily be able to crush any competition that crossed them. These two cartels merging will now pretty much give them a monopoly over the cocaine business. So this also lets us know that the leaders down in Mexico are also similar to Che, where they would pick business over violence or unnecessary wars. I also wonder if these cartel leaders got wind of what was taking place back in Chicago prior to Tommy getting kicked out of CBI, and how they were uniting all the gangs and saw how much money it was making and decided to do something similar. The Estrada cartel would have seen the benefits of this themselves, as Che would have been making them more money than he used to. And with the Marquez cartel, a wild card to keep in mind is Taichin Chan, who was introduced as Roberto Ortega's lawyer, only for it to be revealed that he was only posing as a lawyer like Kane did in book 2. But when it was revealed that Bill Sang was in the pocket of the Marquez cartel, Chan specifically told Sang to get him everything he knows about Tommy Egan. And this is a storyline that was never circled back around. What specifically did Sang tell Chan concerning Tommy? So Chan could have also found out what Tommy had been building in Chicago and reported it to his bosses in Mexico, while also telling them that Ortega was wilding out. And this could have been why the Marquez cartel decided to have a sit down with the Estrada cartel to talk about a merger, as they ultimately gave the green light for their cartel rep, Roberto Ortega, to be taken off the board. But now, as Tommy is heading back to New York to move Chase powder in the city, a big question to ask is, does the cartel already have a distro in New York City? Because with New York being the biggest city in the U.S., it's hard to believe that the cartels haven't already tried to plant their flag in New York. But like I said earlier in the video, we didn't hear anything about a cartel operating in New York throughout the Book 2 series. Even though there was that bust that Carter made at the beginning of Season 2, which left the Russians without a plug, and the news report said, NYPD narcotics bust major tri-state drug supplier. So I think that this was probably a cartel rep in a similar position to Che or Ortega, who Carter busted. And we also know that Noma had planned on becoming the main connect in New York when she arrived, as her distro Mecca said when he got to New York that there was a power vacuum in the city that he was looking to fill. And another connect who was trying to do the same thing when Mecca got into town was a connect named Mahoney, who had never been seen on screen. So there's also the possibility that he was connected to the cartel as well. But at the conclusion of the series, when Tariq connected with Chinadu, it didn't seem like at that point the cartel had a network already in place in New York. But even when it comes to Chinadu, we don't know who his connections are either, and if he's connected to either the Marquez or Estrada cartel, which he likely is, because he has to be getting his powder supply from somewhere. And in regards to Che and Miguel, there is also still the unfinished storyline of how Miguel killed Che's son to take over the IPs, which I don't think was brought up for no reason. So that should also be a storyline that eventually circles back around at some point in Power Legacy. But because Che's son was the former leader of the IPs, and we can now confirm that Che is a rep and not the boss, a question is, was Che once the leader of the IPs who got promoted to cartel rep? And that could have been when he promoted his son to leader of the IPs. And with that said, like I mentioned earlier, how Chan was getting intel on Tommy, could Tommy's endgame actually end up being that he gets promoted to cartel rep, dealing directly with the cartels in the same position that Che is in right now? Keep it in mind that the idea for the cartels to start using reps likely came from Lobos, as he was basically trying to get Ghost to be his rep before Ghost set him up to get locked up. So after the deaths of Lobos and the Jimenez, the cartels probably realized that Lobos and the Jimenez were too exposed, and that's how they were taken off the board. So at that point, they probably started using reps as a way to insulate themselves. And there you have it. Leave your thoughts, theories, and predictions in the comments.